I knew shit was sideways the second Mason's Slack popped up at 11:47 p.m. on a Friday night. Turn in your badge. That was it. No context. No HR. No subject line. Just 7 syllables of smug, tech bro ego dripping off my screen like a lukewarm IPA. I stared at it for a second, waiting for the punchline, maybe a follow-up saying, LOL JK or some idiot emoji. Nothing. Just that message. Like I was a character in one of his little fantasy reorganizations. He didn't even have the balls to do it during work hours. I'd been holding that damn company together for 6 years, through 3 reorgs, 2 failed acquisitions, and one absolutely batshit ransomware scare, where the only reason we didn't lose everything was because I had personally called a backup vendor from my mom's funeral. And now this? A Slack message at midnight, like I was late returning a library book. I didn't cry. That's the funny part. I didn't even feel much of anything. Maybe I'd already been grieving the place for months and just didn't know it. You don't realize how deep the rot goes until someone pokes it and your whole leg caves in. I closed my laptop, packed my stuff. The way you do when you've done this before: file, drawer, mug, backup charger. The mug I stole from conference room B. USB drive labeled Janet's recipe ideas, spoiler. It's SOC 2 audit templates. My hand hesitated over my badge. I left it on top of my manager's desk, neatly aligned magnetic strip facing up. Because I am polite, even when I'm seething. But before I walked out, I logged one last task. Initiate vendor failover protocol. Now let me explain something without sounding like one of those, and that's when I knew I held all the cards Reddit heroes. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't a trap. This was procedure. When an authorized user with elevated access is terminated without succession protocol, failover initiates. It's built that way. Because when you're dealing with sensitive systems and vendor networks stitched together by 12 years of corporate duct tape, somebody needs to hit the brakes before things spiral. That somebody used to be me, so I triggered it. Clicked confirm, walked out. Oh, and hey, quick thing before we go any deeper. If you're enjoying this twisted little tale of office politics, passive-aggressive backstabbing, and the gloriously stupid consequences that follow, do me a solid. Hit that like button. Subscribe, because 90% of folks listening don't, and honestly, watching that number go up is one of the few things keeping my team from losing their minds while editing these dumpster fires of human behavior. All right, onward. I spent that weekend ignoring the chaos. My phone buzzed a few times, unknown numbers, Slack notifications trying to force themselves past the deactivation, 2 LinkedIn requests from people I knew didn't like me. I let the kettle whistle and poured tea slowly, like I had all the time in the world. I did. I didn't. The failover protocol, when triggered, locks core systems into read-only and wipes temporary admin credentials. Vendors are notified. New access keys are withheld until the designated officer reactivates the environment. It's not personal, it's just how the policy works. A policy I wrote. A policy they signed. Mason, bless his protein shake brain, never read past the summary slides. He assumed I was just legacy glue, a kind of quiet woman you nod at in meetings and forget to include in Slack threads until someone asks, hey, does Janet have access to that? Yes. Yes, Janet had access. Janet was the access. But Mason didn't know or didn't care, probably both. Monday was going to be a very long day for Mason, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. By the time Monday morning rolled around, I'd already done 2 loads of laundry, prepped a week of quinoa bowls, and trimmed my cat's nails while reruns of Judge Judy screamed justice into the void. Meanwhile, at 8:03 a.m., the first ripple of Mason's ego tsunami hit the company like a wet fart in an elevator. He opened the all-hands stand-up with this syrupy little line. Team, we've cleared some legacy bandwidth and are moving toward an optimized vendor stack. Translation. I just fired the only person who knew which plug went into which corporate orifice, and I think I'm the messiah. He went on to brag about how he'd already been in preliminary conversations with 3 new vendors, names he plucked straight out of a SAW startup podcast, no doubt. One of them, I shit you not, had Ninja in their name. That's how you know they're garbage. The Zoom call was quiet, except for the occasional dry cough or fake typing click. A few folks nodded, those fragile corporate nods people do when their mortgages depend on pretending enthusiasm. My favorite part? The compliance lead, Danny, muted herself halfway through Mason's speech and just stared blankly at the screen like someone watching a toddler juggle steak knives. By 9:15, cracks started showing. Subtle things at first. Jira tickets failing to update, wire transfers from Friday's finance batch still sitting and pending. One unfortunate soul in customer success named Brandon who pinged the team chat with, hey, anyone else locked out of the billing portal? 5 minutes later, another message. Also, the status page is down. Mason ignored it, or didn't see it, or assumed it would fix itself because his understanding of back-end systems was the equivalent of a toddler smashing a remote and calling himself an engineer. At 9:52, my name disappeared from Slack entirely. Vanished. Like I'd never existed. No at Farewell Janet thread. No thank you for your service gif. Just a quiet delete from a directory I helped build. Felt like watching someone erase your initials from wet cement and thinking they owned the sidewalk. Except Mason missed something. See, the system that handles compliance overrides doesn't rely on Slack or Outlook or even the internal HR database he'd been so proud to streamline. It runs on a separate workflow entirely. When I personally migrated to a secure archive after our last audit when the vendor suggested adding role-based override protections. At 10:12 a.m., I got one final auto email on my personal backup account. No subject line. Just this, designated officer override pending. That's when I knew the lights were starting to flicker. The system was trying to check me back in. Not Mason, not the new procurement intern who probably still thought NetSuite was a mattress brand. Me. And until that override is cleared, until the designated officer authorizes reactivation, the whole damn thing stays locked. No handoffs, no vendor changes, no invoice reconciliations, nothing. I didn't smile, not yet. Instead, I forwarded the email to my attorney, subject line, TikTok. Across town, I imagined Mason pacing the conference room, barking into his phone, while some poor IT analyst tried to explain why the new vendor onboarding process was now returning a 403 error and a cheery little message that read, System awaiting validation from designated compliance officer. Please refer to SOC2 binder, page 93. I mean, I could have warned them. But they didn't ask. They just cut me out like a skin tag on a YouTube tutorial. It's always the quiet women who install the tripwire. By noon, the wheels weren't just coming off, they were on fire, rolling downhill into a daycare. I watched it all unfold from my kitchen table, bowl of oatmeal slowly turning into cement, while my inbox lit up like a Christmas tree of corporate despair. All forwarded, all automatic, all triggered by the very same back-end infrastructure Mason thought he could cleanse with motivational quotes and buzzword bingo. At 12:06 p.m., the first email from a client rep came through. Subject, urgent, access issues CRM down body. Hi there, our team is unable to access CRM data. We have a meeting with a federal contractor at 2 p.m. and need immediate resolution. Please escalate as required. 2 minutes later, another, subject, billing API not responding, your payment portal is down. This is impacting automated settlements. This constitutes a breach of SLA if not resolved within 4 hours. By 12:22 p.m., someone must have realized the CRM wasn't just glitchy, it was dead. Not frozen, not in maintenance. Just lights out, cold body dead. The kind of dead you get when a system reboot is locked behind a failover protocol that no one in the building had the clearance to initiate. Because I was the clearance. And they'd booted me with the same grace they'd used to delete a calendar invite. I pictured Mason at that moment, probably still in denial, still adjusting his stupid silicone wristband, and telling himself this was just a blip. Probably muttering something like, have we tried turning it off and back on again? As if that could resuscitate a system chained to a locked compliance fault. At 12:47, Mason finally called IT. There's a guy named Phil over there. Mid-50s, survived 3 rounds of layoffs by sheer ability to fix shit at 3 a.m. with nothing but a Red Bull and mild threats of retirement. Mason didn't like Phil. Too blunt, too unimpressed, too likely to call bullshit without dressing it up in synergy speak. Phil picked up, chewed his gum into the mic and said, yup, we're locked out too. Root access revoked. Restarts frozen at phase 2. Pause. Mason, what does that mean? Phil, means someone pulled the damn fire alarm and you fired the guy with the key to the panel. That's the thing about legacy systems. They're ugly, messy, duct-taped with dependencies nobody remembers until they break. But they work. And when they fail, they don't whisper, they scream. By 1:30 p.m., finance had entered DEFCON 3. Wire approvals were piling up, all stuck behind the same wall of system purgatory. Status: pending security officer validation. Mason tried logging into the vendor portal himself. Denied. He pinged procurement. Denied. Tried to authorize via emergency override. The system laughed. Denied. Meanwhile, the notification logs were quietly pinging my personal email, the one tied to my offsite SOC2 backup node. I didn't even need to log into anything. The system was doing what it was built to do. Default to the last verified designated officer until manual reassignment passed a compliance review. And guess what nobody ever did? They never reassigned the role. Mason, in his infinite glittering confidence, never even checked. I sat back, turned on my kettle, and queued up my favorite crime podcast. The theme song kicked in right as another automated alert rolled in. Subject: escalated SLA alert, multiple clients reporting access failures. I clicked archive and let the kettle whistle a little longer than usual. Let it scream into the air the way Mason probably was by now. Felt good. In the boardroom, I imagined him pacing, sweat forming beneath that overpriced dress shirt, voice climbing an octave with every denied access code. Every we're looking into it. Every silence on the other end of the line. That silence, that was me, and I wasn't answering. At 2:11 p.m., legal finally joined the party. Too little, too late, too confused. A thread popped up in my inbox. Subject line looked like a scream in Helvetica. Urgent. System-wide failure legal engagement required. I didn't even have to open it. I could hear the panic oozing out of Outlook from across town. Lawyers must have started sniffing around once the fourth vendor emailed back something along the lines of, due to failover activation, we are contractually restricted from providing support until designated reauthorization is completed. Translation: you triggered the kill switch. Now you need the key holder. And whoops, you fired her via Slack while eating kale chips in your $400 ergonomic chair. The thing about SOC2 compliance that no one reads until they're knee-deep in digital sewage is this. It's not just a fancy sticker. It's the only thing standing between you and the lawsuits. You don't get to skip steps. You don't get to fast-track restoration. You don't get to duct tape your way out of a governance clause that was signed, notarized, and recertified in the last audit. And Mason, he never even read the damn binder. By 3 p.m., board member was CC'd. That's how you know it's real, not BCC'd, not looped in quietly. A hard, visible CC right under the legal counsel's name like a siren strapped to an email thread. I leaned back in my chair and watched the storm spread. Someone finally had the sense to call. A junior tech, bless him. Kid named Elijah. I think I bought him a cookie once during onboarding because he looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. He called my personal cell with the same energy of someone trying to defuse a bomb they accidentally sat on. Hi, Janet. Sorry to bother you, he stammered. I know you're not technically with us anymore. But I have kind of a weird question. I didn't say anything. Let him squirm a second. He continued, were you ever, officially listed as the designated officer on the compliance records? I didn't laugh. Not yet. Just said, check the binder, and hung up. 10 minutes later, the emergency meeting invite was created. Subject: SOC 2 Infrastructure Lockdown Emergency Review Time, 9:00 a.m. Tuesday. Mandatory attendance. Board oversight requested. They were about to sit in a room and realize their entire infrastructure was frozen behind a nameplate they'd unceremoniously deleted, one that legal had already confirmed could only be updated through an authenticated, board-reviewed handoff. Handoff Mason skipped in his rush to look decisive. Phil, that old IT vet, sent me a screenshot around 4:30. It was the vendor failover dashboard, showing everything unlocked or validation required. His message just said, they finally noticed. Mason's pacing like a cat in a thunderstorm. I smiled for the first time that day. Not a grin, not vindictive. Just the kind of smile you wear when someone finally sees the writing you left on the wall 6 months ago. It wanted to treat me like I was invisible. Replaceable. Well, now the ghost was holding the fuse. By Tuesday morning, you could practically hear the sound of butts clenching all the way from HR to the boardroom. The emergency meeting kicked off at 9:00 a.m. sharp, but not before a panicked flurry of CYA emails flooded inboxes company-wide, each one soaked in more desperation than the last. Legal trying to trace who signed off on what. Finance pointing fingers at it. IT dragging procurement into the mud. And right in the center of the circus, Mason, suddenly choking on the same buzzwords he used to fire me. I had full authority, he reportedly said. Loud, too loud, like volume could turn fiction into policy. Janet's position was redundant under the new structure. I was hired to optimize operations, and I was told I had discretion. HR chimed in with all the backbone of a jellyfish. We followed Mason's directive in good faith. There was no indication this would impact compliance workflows. Good faith, huh? These are the same people who wouldn't let me roll over vacation hours from 2020, but now we're talking faith? Now that the company's stuck in full operational lockdown and clients are howling like wolves at the gates. The funny thing is, when you build the bones of a company, when you're the one doing the late-night vendor calls, the spreadsheet necromancy, the policy wrangling with lawyers who bill $900 an hour, you remember who signs what. And you sure as hell remember what happens when you get erased by a glorified project manager with the emotional depth of a decorative succulent. Meanwhile, somewhere between Mason's chest puffing and HR's lukewarm excuses, a junior compliance analyst, I think her name was Priya, raised her hand and said the quiet part out loud. Sorry, she said, barely above a whisper. We never officially reassigned the designated officer field. It still lists Janet. Silence. You could probably hear the blood drain from Mason's face through the walls. Someone probably tried to spin it in the room, I'm sure. Some nonsense about outdated systems, legacy fields, how it was symbolic and not operational. But none of that mattered, because SOC2 doesn't care how you feel about roles. It cares about who's certified, logged, documented, and confirmed. And as of that moment, there was still only one name that met all four. Mine. At 10:18 a.m., I got a LinkedIn message. Mason, no subject, no greeting. Just this, would love to chat briefly if you're available today. Oh, Mason, sweetie, you fired me via Slack at midnight with all the warmth of a printer error code. Now you want a friendly little chat? I didn't respond. Just took a screenshot, filed it under a folder labeled begging, chronological, and forwarded it to my lawyer. I knew what he wanted. He wanted me to fix it, quietly, smooth it over. Come crawling back for a temporary consulting role at a nice little discount. A peace treaty drafted in panic. But I wasn't interested in peace. Not yet. Let the system stay broken a little longer. Let legal keep tripping over their own red lines. Let the board stew in silence. They wanted a new regime? Welcome to it. At exactly 8:57 a.m. the next morning, a man in a charcoal gray suit walked past reception with the kind of slow, deliberate confidence usually reserved for coroners and tax auditors. Not the kind who gets flustered. The kind who documents your panic in real time, initials it, and adds it to a report with your name at the top. It was from Artisan Partners, the firm we brought in every year for our SOC2 audits. External, uncompromising, the kind of people who read everything, the kind of people you don't want to surprise. His name was Fletcher. I remember because he once audited our vendor access controls 3 years ago and flagged Mason's predecessor for critical overreach after finding one unsanctioned password reset request. The poor guy quit a week later. Fletcher doesn't raise his voice. He just circles things, then hands them back to you like a scalpel. This morning, he walked into the conference room carrying the binder, the physical one, our company's holy grail of compliance, every policy, every amendment, every digital lock and analog key tucked into 100 pages of bureaucratic gospel. Mason tried to shake his hand. Fletcher gave a polite nod and sat down without a word. Everyone else was already there. HR, legal. Mason, of course, wearing his nervous smirk like a badge of courage made out of tissue paper. Someone from the board, and poor Priya from compliance, sitting there like she wished the floor would swallow her whole. Fletcher opened the binder with gloved fingers. That's how serious he was, gloves, not white but close enough to make HR squirm. He flipped methodically. Page 14. Page 27. Page 47. Then, with the kind of calm that makes people start sweating before anything's even been said, page 93. He turned the binder around so it faced the table. Tapped the line with a silver pen. Didn't read it out loud yet, just tapped it. It was highlighted in yellow, my doing. From months ago during a policy revision session, no one showed up to but me and the legal intern who now works at a crypto startup. Mason leaned forward, squinting like the letters were written in Aramaic. Fletcher finally read it, slow, measured. Restart of critical infrastructure following full vendor failover shall require authentication and signed approval by the designated officer of record. Silence, a beat. Then who is she? Not who was, not who should be, not can we update this. Is she? No one spoke. Mason opened his mouth, closed it. His face did this twitchy little thing like he was fighting a sneeze and an existential crisis at the same time. Legal fumbled through their own copy of the binder like maybe Fletcher had misread it, like their version of reality might be written on a different page. HR's mouth opened, then shut. They looked at each other, looked at legal, looked at Mason. But no one answered, because they all knew, the line hadn't been updated, the form hadn't been re-signed. There was only one name listed under designated officer of record, printed in bold, black ink on page 93, confirmed in the last audit cycle, verified with time-stamped approval from the board. Mine. Fletcher tapped the binder again. No expression, no mercy. Outside the conference room, the hallway was dead quiet. Inside, all that buzzword bluster and agile transformation vaporized like breath on glass. They hadn't just broken a system. They deleted the one person who could fix it. The first major client call hit before noon. And it wasn't the usual passive-aggressive just checking in nonsense. This was a federal agency account, one of the crown jewels Mason liked to name drop in board decks like he'd landed it personally instead of inheriting it like a trust fund kid, getting handed a yacht he didn't know how to steer. They didn't waste time with pleasantries. The client's director of infrastructure security got right to it. We're now 36 hours into unresolved system inaccessibility, she said, voice like a blade. If we don't receive a verified reauthorization from your designated officer by close of business today, we will begin breach proceedings under Section 12 of the SLA. Mason stammered. Legal tried to offer we're working on a temporary solution bluff. The client interrupted. We don't negotiate protocol. Click. By 12:30 p.m., the board was in full bunker mode. The same people who ignored my promotion proposals and couldn't spell SOC2 without Google were suddenly experts in compliance chain of custody. Half the executive suite started calling in sick. The rest were pointing fingers with the enthusiasm of toddlers caught near a broken lamp. The blame carousel spun fast. HR claimed they were acting on direction. Legal blamed ambiguous role documentation. Mason, sweet delusional Mason, tried to argue I had never informed him of my designated officer status, which would have been a compelling defense if it wasn't for the time-stamped email Phil from IT dropped like a brick in the middle of the thread. Subject, due role confirmation compliance update date, 6 months ago. From Janet H. to Mason T. IT Security. Compliance thread attachment. PDF of the signed audit memo with my initials next to the designated officer field and a little note in the body that read, please confirm this update before end of week to meet audit window. No response from Mason. Just a Slack emoji react back then. Raising hands now the same man was in front of the boardroom projector trying to claim amnesia. Phil's follow-up message was even better. For context, this thread is also archived on the compliance node and auto-backed to external legal for SOC traceability. Happy to resend if needed. Happy to resend. I'm told Mason didn't say much after that. Just stared down at his overpriced loafers like they might contain answers. Someone on the board finally muttered, "How did we not catch this?" And the question hung there like a bad smell. Meanwhile, I was home, still in sweatpants. My cat Pickles, snoring in a sunbeam. And I was sipping a latte when the email came through. Subject: Consultant Inquiry Short-Term Reinstatement Offer from Interim Relations at Company Com Body. Janet, we understand there may have been oversights in recent transitions. In light of current circumstances, we'd like to extend an invitation for a short-term consulting engagement to support immediate system restoration. Rate: 3x former salary. Scope: Designated Officer Reauthorization and Audit Liaison. Duration: negotiable, no apology, no ownership, just a bribe in a Gmail-scented envelope. I stared at it for a long moment, then forwarded it to my lawyer with one line, attached this to the binder right after page 93, because now it wasn't about systems. It wasn't about protocol, it was about respect, and they were still 3 exits behind on that highway. By Thursday morning, the board had stopped trying to salvage Mason and started prepping him for sacrifice. The vote happened quietly, off camera, in one of those executive breakout sessions where they pretend to weigh all the factors, but have already picked out the fall guy before the quasas are unwrapped. 4-1 in favor of immediate suspension, pending internal review. The lone dissenting vote came from a board member who once said in a town hall that compliance was mostly vibes. When the verdict was delivered, Mason was allegedly mid-sentence in a follow-up with legal, trying to suggest a rebranding of the incident as a transitional audit enhancement. He didn't even make it to lunch. HR was the first to blink. At 11:14 a.m., they sent the most sterilized, passive-aggressive email I've seen in my entire career. Subject: Reinstatement Inquiry. Hi Janet, we hope you are doing well. In light of recent events, the organization would like to explore the possibility of reinstating your role as designated officer to facilitate critical system recovery. Your expertise is greatly valued. Please let us know if you are available for a brief conversation at your convenience. The subtext was clear. We've burned the bridge, paved it over with bad decisions, and now we're standing in the crater wondering why no one's coming to help. I didn't respond right away. I went for a walk, bought myself a fresh notebook and a coffee I didn't need, just to feel the power of time being mine again. Then, when the sun hit just right, I typed exactly 14 words. Please send request through my attorney. Rates and terms attached. Sincerely, Janet. The terms were generous for me. Triple rate, 2-week minimum, no non-compete, no NDA about the failover event. A clause requiring Mason to be completely excluded from any meetings, documentation, or systems I touched. I even added a line that said client to provide own pen. Felt poetic, they agreed within the hour. No counter. Just a digital signature from someone in legal with a CC to the acting CFO and a note that read expedite courier. And no, I didn't go back in. There's something sacred about never returning to the scene of your own erasure. They wanted me gone, they got their wish. My body didn't cross the threshold. Only my instructions did. I sent the binder back via courier. Not the one they had, the real binder, the annotated copy, my copy. Margins full of sticky notes, flags, color-coded tabs, every version history tracked, every revision logged in red pen. A little post-it on the front, please review before attempting to fix what you don't understand. The courier was a guy named Trent, wore a Metallica hoodie and smelled faintly of vape juice and something herbal. Perfect. I told him, don't give it to anyone who doesn't say thank you. He just nodded and said, I got you. 2 hours later, I got a notification that the compliance team had restored systems under my signed override. By then, Mason had already been locked out of all admin panels. His badge had been deactivated, and someone on Slack, probably Phil, changed the hash InfraAlerts channel topic to now accepting prayers and pizza for surviving idiots. Cold fire doesn't need to scream, it just burns clean. The final boardroom meeting looked more like a courtroom than a company sync-up. No small talk, no quasas. Just strained faces, glowing laptops, and one giant screen at the head of the table waiting for me to join. They sent the Zoom invite 3 times. The subject line kept changing. First it was system reactivation protocol, then emergency resolution support, and finally compliance confirmation call immediate. I joined precisely 2 minutes late, on purpose. When my camera turned on, I made sure they saw it all. Calm lighting, neutral wall. A neatly arranged binder in front of me, my binder, not their paper-clipped Frankenstein mess. And in my hand, a glass of tea, chamomile, still steaming. Fletcher, the artisan auditor, sat at the head of the physical table like a man officiating a burial. He adjusted his tie, opened the SOC2 compliance binder to page 93, and began reading aloud. His voice was steady, not dramatic, just absolute. Restart of critical infrastructure following vendor failover shall require authentication and signed approval by the designated officer of record. He paused, let the words settle like ash over a crime scene. Then he looked up from the page. His eyes swept the room, legal, HR, board reps. Mason looking like a man who just realized the light at the end of the tunnel was a train. Finally, Fletcher asked, with the clarity of a guillotine blade, "So who is she?" No one moved. You could hear someone exhale through their nose like they'd been holding it too long. Fingers clenched pens. A laptop fan whirred nervously in the background. Even Mason didn't speak. For once in his overclocked, underqualified life, he understood the power of silence. I sipped my tea, tilted my head slightly, then nodded. I am. The sentence landed like a verdict, calm, clean, and irreversible. Everyone went quiet. No one tried to rebut it. There was no gaslight attempt. No, well, technically nonsense. Just that raw, collective understanding of a truth they'd all ignored until it had locked them out of their own damn company. I leaned forward, still composed, and added, "I'll need a formal apology before we proceed. Not a phone call, not a groveling email. A formal apology, in writing, on company letterhead, acknowledging that I had been removed without due process and that my reinstatement was being made not as a favor but as a correction." HR shifted in their seats like toddlers caught drawing on the walls. Legal pretended to take notes. Mason didn't even lift his head. Just sat there, hands clasped like a man praying to a god he'd ignored until the flood arrived. Fletcher closed the binder, slowly, deliberately. He turned to Mason and said with the dispassion of a man who's delivered the sentence before, "Until she signs off, the audit fails, and the system stays dead." No one argued. Mason didn't speak. He just stared at the table in front of him like it might offer a trapdoor. But there was none, just consequence. I gave them a thin, polite smile. The kind of smile you offer before locking a vault, and then, without another word, I ended the call, clicked leave meeting, closed the lid. Tea still warm, let them sit in it. Let them earn every minute of that apology, because they mistook silence for surrender. And now the quiet held the switch. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.